is a sunny, cheap, socialist republic in Southeast Asia. Is it one of the best countries in the region to move to, or should you avoid it at all costs? Let's find out. In this video, I'll tell you more about the following. First, we'll talk about Vietnam in general, a little bit of background and other useful things to know about this country. Secondly, what are the requirements for moving to Vietnam? Is this actually possible for foreigners? Next up are some of its advantages and disadvantages. Then I'll lay out some numbers and facts which determine Vietnam's score. And finally, I'll give you my conclusion based on all the information in this video. If you like this kind of content and you want to see more of it for free, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. The more interactivity the better, and the more videos I can provide you with. Okay, let's get started. Vietnam lies in Southeast Asia and is, with its massive population of nearly 100 million, the 15th most populous country in the world. It shares borders with China, Laos, and Cambodia. The capital, Hanoi, lies in the north of the country, while the largest city, Ho Chi Minh City, formerly known as Saigon, lies in the south. Vietnam is probably most known for the prolonged and ill-fated war the United States waged there. While Vietnam has been an economic disaster for many decades in the 20th century, by the end of the 1980s, economic and political reforms took place, which turned Vietnam into a developing country with a bright future. In fact, it is one of the fastest growing economies of the 21st century and is expected to continue on this trail for years to come. If you want to take advantage of the rise of a local economic giant, moving to Vietnam is a good option. Keep in mind that it is a Southeast Asian developing country, so at the moment, local infrastructure is still subpar and petty crime and corruption are pretty common. Currently, the country is a unitary Marxist-Leninist, one-party socialist republic, a communist state, in other words. However, this theoretical label shouldn't be taken too seriously. The country has embraced capitalism rather significantly, which of course has led to this economic growth. Internationally, Vietnam declares itself a friend and partner of all countries in the international community, regardless of their political affiliation. The country actually seems to be serious about this and even has cordial relations with the US now. Who would have thought? The geopolitical issues and territorial disputes with China have no doubt played a major part in this tentative alliance. Vietnam is pretty comparable to Thailand and the Philippines in Southeast Asia and Paraguay in Latin America regarding low cost of living and climate. Geographically speaking, Vietnam consists mostly of hills and dense tropical forests. Mountains cover 40% of its land area. Of course, there are also plenty of rivers, deltas, lakes, cave systems, coastal lowlands, and so on. Earthquakes do occur sometimes, but they're not nearly as devastating or as prevalent as in countries like Japan or the Philippines. Despite being a tropical country, its climate does tend to vary quite significantly depending on the region and the season. As one of the only 25 countries with a high biodiversity, Vietnam is home to roughly 16% of the world's species. Can foreigners actually move to Vietnam? Let's look at the requirements. If you look at moving to Vietnam from a visa perspective, you definitely need to apply for one. You can then extend it, but there are certain limits. Getting residence is technically possible, but you do need to have a familial bond to a Vietnamese citizen, so for most of us, that isn't an option. Sadly, if you want to stay in Vietnam long term, in most cases you'll need to do visa hopping, leaving the country every few months and then coming back. Other than that, as is the case with every other nation you can move to if you want to escape the West, the only real requirement for moving to Vietnam is being self-employed with an international, location-independent income. If you can make money wherever and whenever you want, you're good to go and living in Vietnam becomes an option, provided you can deal with the visa situation. Are there many benefits to living in Vietnam? Most certainly. Vietnam is on the rise and has been for several decades. This is one of the strongest growing economies in the world, and by living and possibly investing there, you can enjoy the rise of a local juggernaut up close. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but there are some absolutely stunning girls in Vietnam. Vietnam doesn't have the best climate in the world, it's too humid, but it certainly is pretty sunny and warm. If you're tired of being cold and miserable in your Western nation, this would certainly be an improvement. Vietnam has problems with petty crime and corruption, but big crimes like murders or terrorism are very uncommon. In addition, it doesn't really have any major enemies or international disputes, aside from some territorial issues with China, but which Asian country doesn't? Vietnam is a cheap Southeast Asian country, so your dollar or euro will go very far. With just an average Western sized salary, you can live a very good life here. Vietnam is often associated with the thick, dangerous jungles you can see in movies about the Vietnam War, which were often actually shot in the Philippines. But this country has so much more to offer: great beaches, mountains, rice fields, ancient heritage sites, and so on. That's not to say there aren't any downsides of living in Vietnam. Apart from the need to get a visa before you travel there, you can also only extend this a few times at most. Visa hopping will most likely be needed if you want to stay there long term, unless you marry a Vietnamese citizen. The average Vietnamese citizen does not speak English well, so you'll often have to get by with sign language or just use your phone to translate. However, Vietnam is a rising nation and more emphasis is being placed on education, so in the future, this factor will likely improve. Many layers of government are corrupt, and this could affect you in the form of police officers expecting bribes and taking advantage of you as a foreigner. Petty crime also occurs, so beware of pickpockets and other low-life scumbags, such as taxi drivers taking unnecessarily long roads. While you cannot easily avoid the latter, most of these issues can be averted by basically not being an idiot. Stay humble, don't flash your cash, phone, or other valuables around, and avoid antagonizing or getting the attention of the local authorities. Vietnam is in full development, which is certainly a good thing, but this also means that there are plenty of underdeveloped aspects here, such as the aforementioned corruption, poor infrastructure, and low levels of English proficiency. If you're an American, you might encounter some overtly hostile Vietnamese citizens. While this is very stupid on their part, you personally didn't kill any of their ancestors, I assume. This is something you'll have to take into account and take in stride. It isn't common, but I've seen American tourists get dirty looks or subpar treatment from usually older Vietnamese people. Vietnam has a decent climate, but not a great one. It's way too humid, and combined with a high average temperature, it means you'll be sweating often if you're out during the day. This gets even worse if you live in the middle of a city like Saigon. How does Vietnam fare on my scoring system based on its climate, level of English proficiency, cost of living, taxes on international income, economic growth, safety, and the logistics of moving and staying there? Vietnam's climate isn't that great, despite having a near perfect average temperature. There are plenty of rainy days and the humidity is pretty high as well. Unfortunately, the average Vietnamese citizen isn't too proficient in English, but this is getting better every year, just like mostly everything else in Vietnam. Cost of living in Vietnam is pretty low, as you can imagine if you're at all aware of the realities of Southeast Asia. Apart from Singapore, every country in this region offers a lower cost of living than the West. And if you want to live a good life, you can certainly do so here. Based on real numbers and personal experience, you can certainly live decently in Vietnam on roughly $1,000 per month. Vietnam has a progressive tax system, and you'll have to pay up to 35% if you are a resident. If you stay more than 182 days per year, you are considered a tax resident and you will get taxed on your worldwide income. This is a better situation than in Western countries, but it's certainly not ideal. Vietnam is a rising power in the region, with an average GDP growth over the last 10 years of 6.5%. Many consider it to be one of the most likely nations to be a massive success story in the years to come. It already is to some degree, but it has the potential for much more, especially as it leaves behind its communist past and new, open-minded people gain power. A nation to keep an eye on for sure. While Vietnam definitely has some dangerous areas, which country doesn't? In general, it's pretty safe to live here as a foreigner. Just beware of petty crime and corruption. You need a visa to enter the country, with the possibility for a visa exemption or an e-visa, but only up to a few months. After that, you can renew it, but it will cost some money. Getting permanent residency is possible, but you need some familial bond to a Vietnamese citizen, which is unlikely to be the case. Citizenship is also possible after being a resident for a few years, but you need to renounce your existing citizenship. So in my opinion, this is a big no. If we take the average of all these numbers, we can see that Vietnam gets an above average 7.2 out of 10, which makes it one of the better countries you can move to, or at least set up some bases in. And finally, let's answer the question, how is life for expats in Vietnam? Life for expats in Vietnam is reasonably good to great. Even with a moderate income, you can live a relaxed, sunny, and usually stress-free life here. Vietnamese girls are often pretty and interested in foreigners, so that's certainly a plus. The visa situation is far from ideal, but definitely not unmanageable. It's quite humid, but not as much as in other countries such as the Philippines. At least it's sunny and warm nearly every day. For me personally, the low proficiency in English and the visa situation put this country lower on my I want to live there list. But the fact that Vietnam is a booming economy with currently cheap options to invest should alert you to the possibilities. Investing in real estate here can net you up to 6.5% of rental yield, with real estate prices increasing every year. In short, I would use Vietnam as one of your bases to put an asset in, and then visit it every so often to enjoy the fruits this country has to offer. I would advise against living here full time because then you would also have to pay taxes and you would be faced with many of the downsides of the country that you could avoid if you only use it as one of your bases. There we go. Hope you learned something about this country. I'm curious to hear about your thoughts. Are you interested in moving to Vietnam? Or have you been living here for a while and want to add something I forgot to mention? Let me know in the comments below. In any case, if you want more information about other countries you can move to, check out my website at escapingthewest.net. If you want to learn more about why the Western world is going down, how you can make sure you're protected, or if you just want to support the channel, consider checking out my new book available on Amazon. Link in the description. See you in the next video.